Here we are again back at the age-old debate of inspiration versus clone or copy. Now I've already gone over a lot of my thoughts and opinions on this matter in my Dante's Inferno retrospective, but obviously it's not a topic only relevant to a single game. And Darksiders is very much in that same category simply because, again, the game wears its inspirations on its sleeves. It's clear as day that Darksiders takes inspiration from games like God of War, Devil May Cry, and The Legend of Zelda. Though because I've never actually played a Zelda game, I'd personally say I see more Metroidvania inspirations similar to Arkham Asylum in a way. Just because I can point out Darksiders' inspirations doesn't mean they've copied and pasted ideas though, because Darksiders feels like a great concoction of all these different genres and gameplay mechanics to a point where it feels like something truly unique. I have so many fond memories with the Darksiders series, but specifically the original. I mean, the game released when I was 13 years old, so playing a game as one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse was always going to grab my attention. But the memories of the various dungeons, environments, bosses, and characters made for a title that has stuck with me all these years later, and why I'm really excited to revisit the game today. As always though, nostalgia will get you from time to time, so let's put all of those nostalgic memories to the test. It's been about 12 years in between playthroughs, so how does Darksiders hold up today? Is it worth your time revisiting or playing for the first time? And simply, is Darksiders as good as I remember? Let's find out. Just a quick heads up before we get stuck into the video, this is my first retrospective on the Darksiders series, and I will be covering them all over the course of, well, however long that takes. So if you're interested in Darksiders 2, 3, and Genesis as well, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out or forget. Alright, let's get started. First things first, when it comes to the development of Darksiders, there is so close to absolutely nothing on this game's development. No usual suspects such as articles, developer diaries, that sort of thing, no matter how deep I delved into the internet. My one saving grace, however, and the reason I can even make this segment of the video at all, is because of an incredible video called The Darksiders documentary on YouTube created by the Gameumentary. Obviously, I'm not going to go over the entire documentary because I strongly suggest watching it yourself, link in the description, and it's almost 2 hours long, but there is some great nuggets of information within that helps paint a picture of what the development process from beginning to end was like, and that's what I want to touch on. Darksiders was developed by first-time development studio Vigil Games, which was founded in 2005. Despite being a first-time studio, the team was not built of first-time developers, obviously. In fact, the engine that the first two Darksiders games were built upon was a free-time creation when one of the devs was working for another studio, and that 3D engine's potential was the reason multiple developers would leave and start up Vigil Games. The team at Vigil Games was stuck in limbo for a while in regards to what to create for their first game, knowing what they wanted the game to play like, that being primarily inspired by Zelda, but never felt great about any of their list of ideas. One being about a kid with a robot arm that seems to be an idea that lingered the longest, or at least is mentioned the most, and had some sort of potential. But no ideas really excited the team, even after locking themselves in a room until they decided on a game idea. That all changed once someone brought up the idea of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and the team just loved it. But that doesn't mean they got to work straight away on the Darksiders we all know and love today. Members of the team weren't even set on the name Darksiders for a long time, believing it to be just a placeholder name until ultimately, well, we know how that went. The initial idea or elevator pitch for Darksiders though was for a 4-player co-op action adventure featuring all 4 of the Horsemen. It's never explained what happened or why the team moved away from this original elevator pitch of 4-player co-op, but if I had to venture a guess, it was probably dropped just before or after Vigil's meeting with THQ, because the playtest shown around this time very much feels like the skeleton of the Darksiders we know today. The story of how THQ picked up Darksiders though is really interesting. The devs had built up a playtest of again essentially the skeleton of Darksiders and took that with them along with a compact PC and monitor around E3 to show the game off to try and pick up a publisher. Technical difficulties ensued, the team was even laughed out or completely dismissed from meetings, and the last interview of the day was with THQ. And they almost didn't go. At the time, THQ was well known for its licensed content, and with Darksiders being a new and original IP, the team just didn't think it would be a good fit, and that feeling wasn't helped at the beginning of the interview. The head of THQ barely looked up for their presentation, groaned and grumbled, and it just seemed the game wasn't going to get picked up until they finally let them play the playtester. THQ kept bringing more and more people in to have a look at the game, and they loved it, eventually picking the game up and giving Darksiders the chance it deserved. Unfortunately, despite getting greenlit, picked up, and Darksiders being a love letter from Vigil Games, it was one of those games with an infamous crunch time amongst game developers. Around an entire year of crunching, tight deadlines for new devs coming on board, and just all the mistakes that come along with running a first-time studio and creating a new and highly ambitious title. As bad as the crunch sounded though, everyone seems to look back on that time fondly with a lot of team bonding, so I suppose in hindsight it's easier to remember the positives, and I think there is a great analogy in this documentary for that crunch. The crunch in hindsight seems worthwhile because the game would end up succeeding, but if that weren't the case, it would have felt like going to war and losing. At the end of the day, despite crunch not being something I enjoy being such a massive part of this industry, hearing the developers reminisce did make it seem like a lot of fun, I won't lie. Darksiders ended up releasing after about 3.5 years of development in January 2010 to a positive reception both critically and commercially, and the rest is history. So now, after 12 years, how does Darksiders hold up today? Since the beginning of time, the armies of heaven and hell have been at war, with neither side coming out victorious over the other. Over the years, a group known as the Charred Council acted as a mediator to maintain order and balance, and created a warrior brotherhood known as the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse to intervene and enforce the council's rules when necessary. During the war, humans entered the picture, and the Charred Council, believing they would be integral to the balance, named them the Third Kingdom, the Kingdom of Man. The Council finally brokered a truce between heaven and hell and created the mysterious and mystical Seven Seals, to only be broken when mankind was ready and prepared for the end war. When the player assumes control of our protagonist, war arrives on Earth, as the end war has appeared to have begun, as armies of angels and demons wage war, which sees mankind stuck in the middle. War confronts the general of Heaven's army, Abaddon, which is where War discovers that the other horsemen haven't arrived, meaning the seventh seal used to summon the Four Horsemen has not been broken. Due to Abaddon's shock at seeing War, he ends up being killed by a demon commander, Straga, who War faces in battle and gains the advantage before quickly losing his powers mid-fight and almost is killed in the process. War is saved from death by the Charred Council, who accuse him of destroying the balance, siding with the forces of hell and bringing about the apocalypse prematurely, which has resulted in mankind's extinction. War pleads his innocence, demanding a chance to find the real culprits, which the council agrees to, but does not reinstate his lost powers, and is now bound to one of their servants called the Watcher, who has permission to terminate War if he strays from his mission. War returns to Earth, though a lot of time has passed, as it has been about a century since Hell's armies led by the Destroyer annihilated humanity and the armies of Heaven. What remains of Heaven's armies have formed into a lesser resistance group now known as the Hell Guard, led by Abaddon's lieutenant, Uriel. Soon after returning to Earth, we are greeted by the demon merchant, Volgrim, who tells War that the Black Tower is the Destroyer's lair, but to gain access, he's going to need to seek out a once powerful demon lord known as Samael. When War meets Samael, he explains that 4 demons have been chosen to guard the Black Tower, called the Chosen, and in exchange for Samael giving War access to the tower, he wants those Chosen's hearts. While hunting down the various demon hearts, War encounters Ulthane, a skilled blacksmith from a race known as the Makers. The two initially begin fighting each other until they are forced to defend themselves against Uriel and the Hellguard, who believe War is responsible for Abaddon's death and subsequently their defeat. War gradually picks off and Kalimars the 4 Chosen until the demon Silitha reveals that the Chosen were not meant to defend the tower, but instead prevent the return of Samael. But we give him all the hearts anyway, and even though back to full strength, maintains his deal with War and sends him to the tower, vowing they will meet again. Once in the tower, War encounters the Angel of Death, Azrael, imprisoned, and after attempting to free Azrael, confesses that Abaddon, Ulthane, and himself were the ones who brought upon the apocalypse early, as they feared further delay would risk Heaven's demise. With all the proof War needs of his innocence, he decides his mission is complete. However, the Watcher decides that the Destroyer must die to restore balance. War agrees, frees Azrael, and once again we clash with Straga and emerge victorious. Straga and the tower are one though, which means War is trapped until he is saved by Azrael and takes him to the Garden of Eden, which survives due to Azrael hiding it from the demons. War visits the Tree of Knowledge within the garden in the hopes of gathering the knowledge to defeat the Destroyer. The tree gives War a vision though that shows Abaddon was sent to hell after he died and offered a choice by someone unknown: serve in heaven or rule in hell. Abaddon, knowing he would be punished by Heaven and the Charred Council anyway, chooses to rule in hell and becomes the Destroyer, now guarding the unbroken 7th seal. It is also shown that Uriel leads the Hellguard against the Destroyer and being defeated. The council has been aware of all these facts but knew the horsemen would not act without proof and ended up allowing the apocalypse early, summoning War themselves under the assumption War would track down all of these conspirators and clear his name. Finally, War witnesses himself being killed by the Watcher with a mysterious blade. After these visions, Azrael guesses the blade to be the Armageddon Blade, a weapon capable of slaying the Destroyer. But to gain this blade, we need to find the various shards and take them to Ulthane to reforge it. Whilst hunting down the Armageddon shards, Uriel faces War once again, and of course, loses the battle. War reveals to Uriel the identity of the Destroyer, and enraged by this knowledge, she leaves to prepare her angels for battle. Once War collects all the fragments, we return to Ulthane, who forges the Armageddon Blade. Meanwhile, Uriel and her angels begin their attack on the Destroyer, but are defeated as foreseen. In the aftermath, War is posed the same question as Abaddon by the Destroyer, who offers him the chance of ruling in hell. War refuses, battles the Destroyer, and slays him. War retrieves the 7th seal but is subdued by the Watcher, who takes the seal in order to prevent War from regaining his full strength, knowing he will use it to take on the Council. Uriel intervenes by taking the Armageddon Blade and stabs War in the back and shatters the 7th seal, which restores War's original power and frees him from the Council's control. The Watcher threatens the wrath of Heaven, Hell, and the Council on War before ultimately being slain. Uriel, grateful for War, absolves him of any responsibility of the harm done to the angels, but knows her duty may require her to face War in battle again. Uriel warns War that he cannot face the forces of heaven, hell, and the council alone, which he replies that he isn't, as the other three horsemen are seen descending from the sky towards him. And that's the story for Darksiders. Now, if I were to sum up Darksiders' story in one word, well, I'd say good first and foremost, but simple. It's not going to win any story awards, and it's clear the gameplay was the primary focus during development and creating a story that supports the gameplay. But that doesn't mean it's bad, because it's really enjoyable, and at least personally, definitely grabs your attention. I mean, we are stuck in between a battle between heaven and hell and trying to figure out what on earth happened, why the apocalypse began, and why War was the only horseman summoned. It's a solid mystery in a badass world, it doesn't take itself too seriously, and it just creates so many over-the-top badass moments that make it a great time from start to finish. But for me, what carries the story, and why I think I enjoyed it as much as I did, is simply due to the incredible characters. They just make the story that much more engaging and interesting, and are brilliantly performed by the absolutely stacked cast here. Whether it be Samael, the Watcher, Vulgrim, Ulthane, or War himself, the cast and these characters all have so many great quotable lines and make you want to sit and listen to what they have to say and learn about these characters and how they are involved in this chaotic world. Samael is one of my personal favorite characters in Darksiders simply due to the fact that you don't trust him. You don't think what he's asking for is a good idea, and yet you really have no choice. You have to take his deal and hope it doesn't blow up in your face later. But he does do what he can to build your trust. For every heart you give him despite the Watcher's wishes, Samael gives War a new ability, so despite being sketchy, he is doing something to try and gain our trust. You end up strangely looking forward to returning to Samael because you know you're in for a new ability and almost fall into the same mindset as War, where if this does blow up and backfire, well, that's a future problem. That's a common theme for a lot of these characters and their relationship with War, because again, War is stuck in the middle between angels and demons. He isn't on anyone's side, and because of that, he can't really trust anyone, and you feel that with each character. It's almost as if you're questioning why anyone is helping you, whether it be the merchant Vulgrim, brilliantly performed by Hermes' comrade himself, Phil Lamar, or Ulthane and Azrael, the Watcher, again brilliantly performed by Mark Hamill, may be your master in a sense, and you know he doesn't really care for War, but something is off with him from the get-go. Probably the heavy Joker voice gives me that vibe though. All of these uneasy alliances and encounters with various characters from either side makes the player easily connect with War because he's the only one we know we can trust. And at the end of the day, we know whether our gut feeling about a character is right or wrong, we're one of the four horsemen. Surely we can handle whatever this world throws at us. Even the lesser characters are intriguing, like the various demons we're hunting and slaying are captivating and make you want to listen. Maybe I am more intrigued by Darksiders' story than others because of my love for the topic. Angels and demons, heaven and hell, the four horsemen all meshed into this heavy metal style of game just grabs my attention. But I don't think this story works as well as it does without the top tier performances and characters in this crazy apocalyptic world. If I was to nitpick the story, I would say it falls off a little bit when searching for all the demon hearts. Just not a lot really happens in these moments, and it's a large section of the game with not a lot of story happening. But other than that, I just really enjoyed what was on offer here. Again, the story, at least in my opinion, doesn't feel like it was Darksiders' main focus. It's not the game's strongest point, but it's highly entertaining. It's a badass journey that grabs your attention from beginning to end with a nice little mystery whodunit, but the characters this story has are what make it so unique and honestly special. This story can be described as simple, but I do not mean that as a negative, nor does that mean you can't fully immerse yourself in this game's lore, which is surprisingly in-depth. But it knows what it wanted to accomplish, it succeeds in that badass over-the-top goal and makes for an enjoyable story that backs the gameplay beautifully. The gameplay for Darksiders is where that pesky topic of clone versus inspiration comes into play, because there are a lot of mechanics in Darksiders that you could point to and be like, oh, that feels like or is reminiscent of certain game. I mean, just from my own personal experience, you have the health system similar to Medieval, the combat similar to a mix of God of War and Devil May Cry. Even though I've never played one, I know the dungeons are very similar to that of Zelda, the new items and abilities accompanied by backtracking like any good Metroidvania, and even the more demonic and angelic enemy designs feel right at home in something like Diablo. Whilst I listed off quite a few games there, I don't see Darksiders gameplay as this unoriginal concoction of been there, done that ideas, because it feels like the developers were fans of these titles, thought their given systems and mechanics would work well together, and ended up making something wholeheartedly unique in Darksiders. So let's dive into the specifics, and I'll try and explain why I think that is. First and foremost though, I do want to get this off my chest. In my humble opinion, Darksiders doesn't hit its stride until the Twilight Cathedral. Not saying the first couple of hours are terrible or unenjoyable, but once you get to the first dungeon, that's when the puzzles, platforming, combat, and even bosses start to mesh together really well, and to me, that's when this game finds its identity. Before the cathedral though, something just felt off about playing this game for me, and I think it has to do with the initially lackluster combat. Now this isn't a problem unique to Darksiders, because you can't just have all the combinations unlocked from the get-go, otherwise what are you working towards in regards to feeling more powerful? But it is really bare bones here in the beginning. There just isn't enough variety in the combinations to start for my liking, and because of the lack of variety and lack of puzzles and platforming until you get to some of the dungeons, the combat deficiencies are highlighted for far too long, making me honestly believe this game had aged horribly and my nostalgia had lied to me. Thankfully, that didn't end up being the case, and once the combat and all the other mechanics open up, Darksiders is an absolute blast that had me smiling from ear to ear pretty much the whole way through. But that doesn't mean the lackluster opening isn't still a problem, it just improves from here onwards. So with that little confession out the way, let's actually break down Darksiders mechanics, starting with the combat. War ends up amassing quite the arsenal of weapons or gadgets by the end of Darksiders. You have access to the Chaos Eater, which is War's trusty blade, the Earthcaller, Death's Scythe, the Tremor Gauntlet, Mercy, the Crossblade, Abyssal Chain, and Voidwalker in regards to physical weapons, but then you also have to factor in War's Chaos form, the various Wrath abilities, War's Horse Ruin and Horse Combat, and the equipable runes that change up your weapons depending on the effect. In short, you have a lot of tools and abilities to play around with in Darksiders combat, on top of leveling everything up through Vulgrim, unlocking even more potential. All of these options makes Darksiders combat so much fun, because even after just a few more combinations or weapons, it feels like it's, again, finding what it means to have Darksiders style combat. No, each gadget and weapon are not created equal. The Scythe and Tremor Gauntlet just aren't as dependable or various as the Chaos Eater, for example. At least they weren't for me, but I did have the better runes and combinations unlocked, so that could have had something to do with it, but they all feel like they can be useful, whether that be more for platforming, puzzles, or combat. Darksiders combat doesn't take forever to become interesting though. In fact, just from going to Vulgrim a few times and purchasing combinations and Wrath abilities, the combat becomes a lot more enjoyable, because it's not just simple, light, and heavy attacks. You have piercing or dashing attacks, cyclone slams, backflips, and your standard variations on hacking and slashing maneuvers that through leveling up get either more complex or deal more damage. All of these attacks feel great. There isn't anything that comes to mind that feels useless, and combining different combinations only maximizes your damage output. The combat has a great flow about it, but not like a God of War or Devil May Cry. War is a lot more sluggish or tanky in his movements, but the hacking and slashing is just so smooth and seamless that makes the combat feel so fluent, with the added bonus of feeling like what you're doing is packing a real punch to the enemies. The reason I'm highlighting the Chaos Eater the most, at least compared to the other melee weapons at War's disposal, is because, again, I leveled it up the most, but the reason I did so was because you can only increase your Chaos meter and unlock War's Chaos form through using the Chaos Eater. You don't get anything for killing enemies with the Scythe or Gauntlet, so even though they're fun ways to mix up the combat or great for specific enemies, you always want to have the Chaos form available because it's a blast and a power trip for one, but two, it's just necessary in the bigger encounters. I do wish the Chaos form wasn't tied to a single weapon to encourage using the Scythe and Gauntlet, because they feel so different from one another and are a lot of fun to use, but sadly they limited experimentation slightly with this decision, and the longer the game goes on, the more you just have to use the Chaos Eater, constantly gaining you that Chaos form. As for the rest of War's arsenal, the ranged abilities act as great supporting weapons. They aren't big damage dealers, but they aren't supposed to be. The crossblade is probably the most reliable and useful in my opinion, just simply because it deals a solid amount of damage, can lock onto multiple enemies, and if nothing else, stun lock enemies while you focus fire on another enemy. Probably my least favorite is the Mercy pistol, only because the crossblade feels like the far superior ranged option. As for the Earthcaller and Abyssal Chain, they're more puzzle and platforming items, but in combat act as great complements to War's melee options. And then we have War's Horse, Ruin, and Horse combat. Now personally, I didn't partake much in actual combat with Ruin, but it works really well. Ruin has great speed, moves really well, and just feels so powerful looking down and slaying these worthless demons. Speaking of the enemies, there is quite a bit of variety here as well, at least visually. You have enemies big and small, ground-based and airborne, one-hit kills, and enemies that take multiple executions, speedy and slow, enemies with status effects, all that good stuff. The variety in the enemies make utilizing your whole arsenal for the most part a necessity, and makes combat a lot of fun to participate in, and at times, like the waves and waves of angels with Ulthane, is a tense encounter that is a nail biter to the end. The enemies aren't the brightest, they can get stuck in certain cycles of attacks or attacking War one-on-one instead of as a group, but for the most part, it's pretty impressive. If I had to criticize the combat, it would be more so a nitpick with the executions. They're just very repetitive and get boring to watch after a couple of hours. Other than that, and the lackluster first hour or so of combat, as a whole, it's a lot of fun to play. Whilst we're on the combat, and before we move on to the level design, puzzles, and platforming, we need to talk about Darksiders bosses. The bosses in Darksiders are pretty simple in terms of difficulty and strategy. This isn't top quality boss design, and for the most part, every boss is rather easy. But the bosses aren't trying to be a Dark Souls or Souls series level threat. They're trying to be badass battles, and in that regard, I think the bosses here succeed, and that's something that is shown as early as the first battle against Straga. The first boss fight against Straga is not a taxing fight. You throw cars at him when able and dodge his attacks when there are no cars available. It's simple, and I'd like more player engagement personally, but his attacks are pretty damn awesome. I mean, he picks up an entire street to try and defeat War. I wish this Straga battle, being the tutorial boss, showed the player a bit more of the mechanics. All it really does is highlight the lock-on feature specifically for one-on-one battles, but it's a nice visual if nothing else. The first real boss after Straga though is Tiamat, and again it sort of highlights what I'm talking about as she flies around the cathedral and you hurl bombs, damaging her enough to land and wail on her until she's done. Tiamat is a much more engaging and dangerous fight, but by no means difficult. She can just deal a lot of damage, and when you're aiming in with your crossblade, she can spit fireballs at you, but it's more badass than anything. Just look at her design. You're slaying a giant bat demon. It's just cool and enjoyable enough to keep the player interested. Next is the battle against the Griever, who has more of a puzzle-esque fight about it. It's not a hard puzzle, but you're not really fighting against this creature in a one-on-one sense, as you need to continuously hurl a train car into it and avoid the swarms of insects along the way. It's a different fight and not the most spectacular in terms of spectacle, but it's alright. Now, the Stygian fight is one of my personal favourites for the game because it takes place on horseback as you avoid this unnerving sandworm who can appear and disappear pretty damn easily and sneak up on you if you aren't careful. Again, like the rest, not too challenging, but an absolute pleasure to experience, and the massive arena accompanied with the image of war on his apocalyptic horse is just pure Darksiders badassness. Then we have the battle against Silitha, who aside from Uriel and Abaddon is one of the more engaging fights in the game, as she teleports around so frequently and can do big damage quickly that it means you need to be on your P's and Q's and utilize your abyssal chain to gain ground quickly. This fight is pretty decent and engaging to boot, along with feeling right at home down in Australia as I try and get to my car in the morning, but have to fight off giant spiders. After this, we come up against the tower golems that are just plain boring and repeat too often, and then we have the fight against Straga again, which this time around is again waiting around dodging attacks until he reveals a chain point on his weapon to swing around and stab him in the back. His size and appearance is pretty awesome, but Straga just isn't a great boss at the beginning or end. Thankfully, he isn't the final fight though, as we go head to head against Abaddon. This, along with the Stygian battle, is one of my favorites because it blends badass and actually engaging combat into one. The arena is massive as you begin riding atop Ruin and face off against the giant dragon, and then proceeding to fight his demonic self one-on-one. It's all just so much fun. As you can see from my health bar though, I definitely found my rhythm by this point, so challenge-wise, leaves a little to be desired, but also I have no idea how this is on the hardest difficulty, but I'm talking on hard, not too bad. As a whole, pure excitement and stimulus, which is what the developers were going for. That's all without talking about the mini bosses like the Jailer or the Abyssal Gladiator or Uriel or Shadow War, which are again just a lot of fun and make sure you are maximizing your tools at your disposal. Darksiders is not all combat though, and it's actually the other aspects of this game that were so much better than I remembered. Like, for example, as I've said in other videos, I'm not a proficient puzzle solver and can get stumped on some honestly dumb shit, which is why I think the dungeons never really did much for me back in the day. Blasphemy, I know. But damn, they're my favorite parts playing today, and that's simply due to how impressive the level design is here. Darksiders' world is constantly begging you to go out and explore every nook and cranny, which is evident right from the word go, like the hidden passage in the graveyard, or the more explorable underwater caverns with branching paths, or jumping off a cliff hoping to land on a hidden platform below. All these levels, environments, and areas have so many hidden secrets that you won't be able to find your first time through, but are worth going back to and finding them because there are so many hidden rewards hidden away to help you in the long run. Sure, some big upgrades are just in plain sight and a little lacking in terms of, well, being secret, but it makes exploring so much more captivating and intriguing. The levels are so well paced between combat, platforming, and puzzles that it means you never tire of one gameplay mechanic because of how often it changes everything up. The levels also don't really force you to backtrack if you don't want to until the Apocalypse Blade, but you want to because of what you could be missing out on, like the Wicked K encounters or armor, runes, souls, life, and wrath shards. They're just really well designed locales that goes doubly so for most of the dungeons. Twilight Cathedral is a great first dungeon, for instance, because it shows how finely tuned the gameplay loop is and the variation from mechanic to mechanic. It's not the most challenging in terms of puzzles or progression like, say, the Black Throne, but again, it makes exploring the environment, fighting off enemies, platforming and puzzling your way through and around to finally reach Tiamat so much more engaging and fun to play. The same can be said for the Hollow and the very Metro-esque subway systems, or the unique and expansive Ashlands that at first is so terrifying to traverse, as the sandworms can easily catch you in the sluggish sand until you unlock Ruin, slay the worms, and can freely explore this massive desert. Or the spider-infested, unsettling nightmare that is the Iron Canopy. They all just have such a great feeling of progression, along with mixing up every element to Darksiders so well that makes them truly the highlight of the whole experience. The Black Throne, however, does feel like the team are at the deadline quite a bit. The puzzles are great thinkers, the platforming and teleporting is super solid and a ton of fun, and the combat is some of the most challenging in the game, but it just feels too repetitive as you go through objectives multiple times to free Asriel. It's not terrible because the challenge is on point, but it just doesn't feel as tight or fresh as the rest of these incredible dungeons, even though puzzle, combat and platforming wise, it's some of this game's most engaging. While we're on lower points in the level design, I have to say those shadow arenas just grind this game's pacing to a screeching halt. They're essentially long-winded tutorials for the most part, and they just feel like padding, in all honesty. Just a poor decision and feels unnecessary when compared to how incredible this game's levels, pacing and gameplay mix-ups are. In terms of the platforming and puzzle specifics, the platforming is super solid. War has a great weight and height to his jumps. The climbing, gliding and all that good stuff paired with teleporting and chain swinging, it makes for an enjoyable and less mentally taxing break from combat as opposed to the puzzles, which again are tight. For the most part, they aren't the toughest solves, requiring either a piece of equipment or pushing something to another location, but in the Black Throne, they truly shine, like with the room with a ton of switches that move different walls higher or lower, and trying to traverse to the end of this maze, or the rotating block that needs you to have a portal on each side of this pit to throw a bomb and destroy something in your way, or slowing down time in the Ashlands to traverse the world safely and solve the various outpost tower puzzles. If you're looking for hardcore puzzles, Darksiders just isn't it, but for me, they're the perfect level of fun and challenge and make for an engaging break from combat that has you actively participating, which for this style of game is fantastic. Overall, the gameplay for Darksiders is just simply fun. The combat, when it gets going, is an absolute blast. The puzzles are stimulating. The platforming is at times relaxing and feels great to use. The bosses are frequent injections of badass, but that level design, in my opinion, is what carries this game and what makes it so damn spectacular. Darksiders gameplay isn't without fault, but for the amount of ambition, love and care Vigil put into this game, and how all of these ideas and gameplay influences could have crumbled if not executed as well as they are, it's just really impressive. At the end of the day, after all of this yabbering on, Darksiders is so much fun to play, and the flaws in no way outweigh how incredible this game feels to play. So, was Darksiders as good as I remembered? No. It was better. I loved Darksiders back in the day, but for different reasons than I do today. I wasn't big on the dungeons, but loved the environments and combat. And now, well, I still love the environments and combat, but on top of that, I love these dungeons, exploring this world, the puzzles, weapons, upgrades, these characters, and this story. Darksiders was extremely ambitious, And yeah, some of those ambitions don't pan out, like the flying moment before the cathedral, for instance, isn't a great moment, or the repetitive moments in gameplay at times. But most of it sticks the landing and then some. I don't think I appreciated Darksiders enough until now, and I loved it back in the day. But now with age, I've come to realize just how impressive all of this is for a first-time development team no less, and just how ambitious for better or worse the various mechanics are. I had a blast from beginning to end with Darksiders 12 years later, and now I cannot wait to see how my favorite game in the series, Darksiders 2, holds up as well. Thank you all so much for watching my Darksiders retrospective. I had so much fun revisiting Darksiders, and I hope you enjoyed revisiting the game with me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave it a like because it helps let me know that you enjoyed yourself. Shout out to the Bear Cubs, Ish and FT for that extra level of support. I truly do appreciate it. Comment below your thoughts on Darksiders or the series in general, as well as any suggestions for games you want to see covered in the future. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Go give my socials a follow if you fancy, at MayorHairBear, and I'll catch you all in the next video.